When it comes to actual essays across the board and across the conferences, we see two major classifications of struggles with students. The first is haphazard conceptual framing, and the second is going to be ineffective example selection and application. On haphazard framing, this is going to impact everything from your thesis down to how you think about the relationship between being vague and being universal. Part of the Ready Writing contest is talking about what this concept means to be a human, the human condition. Students often struggle and they assume that being vague implies that they are more universal. But counterintuitively, oftentimes being more specific leads to a more universal understanding in readers. A great example of this is a state-winning paper from a couple of decades ago. A student gave an actual personal anecdote in which he painted his fence. It was white, and his elderly neighbor asked him to paint her side of the fence. So he went over and tried to paint her side of the fence, only to realize that her side of the fence was a completely different color. And he had a great line about this personal anecdote. And the idea was that when you live your whole life on one side of the white fence, it's all too easy to assume the other side is white as well. That is a phenomenal way to include personal anecdotes, a specific example that has a universal application. As readers, when we see something like that, that really brings to the focus the notion that making assumptions about others around you and assuming that they have the same experiences and viewpoints you do isn't always the best. And it's much more effective to give that specific example and analyze it than it is to just say, you can't assume that everybody's experiences are the same as yours. The second is the actual relation of the thesis to the body paragraphs. Students really struggle with creating good thesis statements. Oftentimes they lock themselves into being too specific. So for example, they might give us a thesis that is just a historical statement. And when that happens, you're framing the rest of your body paragraphs as just having to be historical evaluations. That's not that interesting. Other times they try to argue too much, and then the body paragraphs don't actually follow through. And so it seems to be a sense of haphazard planning on the student side in the thesis. We also see some conceptual drift. Oftentimes students will make a great thesis statement, but in the planning and development of the essay, they veer off track. They might, for example, make a great thesis statement about the human condition relationship between rationality and cult allegiance. But then the second half of the essay ends up being a critique about America only. If you want to run that route, you certainly can, but America only as a critique needs to be in the thesis. So ensuring that your planning is not haphazard, that you're being specific to accomplish universal aims, and that your body paragraphs actually fit your argumentative structure are things that are vital to overcoming this specific pitfall.
In regards to ineffective examples, example selection is very important. Connects back to the thesis, as Cameron pointed out. Your thesis serves as your overarching claim for your essay. Now, the examples that you choose to use to support that claim are important and are vital for your audience, which would be the judges, understanding that universal connection you're trying to apply. We need clear, specific examples. Just like we don't need a vague thesis statement, we don't need vague examples. We need the idea of your connection into this world and your insights. We hope to see clear, specific examples of student writing. Oftentimes, students fall into the trap of summarizing in excess. Rather than giving us context and understanding and applying a specific example to support their thesis, we basically are provided a story or a narrative. I always told my students, please don't tell me, show me your understanding. And that idea of talking or telling or summarizing too much within the context of examples becomes ineffective. So we want specific, concrete examples universally applied within the context of the thesis. Use caution when only using a book, personal experience, or a movie. Again, we're looking for a variety of examples. We're looking for the application of those examples. And holistically, overall, when you aim for better examples with specificity, those also apply to other aspects of the rubric. We'll see that in the well development section. We'll see it in the grammar and correctness section. And we'll also see it in transitions. So essentially, using good examples, like using a good perspective, will also lend to good writing and a higher score on the essay.
For us, when we're looking at what makes a difference in an essay, we have to think about what matters most in the rubric. So I always like to describe this as a set of concentric circles. Smaller circle in the center, a slightly larger circle, and then an even larger circle. And in this framework, the largest circles matter less. And the largest circle is going to be your conventions, your writing. They matter, they contribute to a good essay, but they don't tend, in our experience, to make the difference when it comes down between two essays. The second circle tends to be your organization. Organization matters. It needs to be logical. It needs to have a good structure, and we need to have a clear essay. But what really makes the difference, and an experienced judge will decide the difference based on this, is that inner circle. And that's on the first side of the rubric, the perceptiveness, the biggest ideas. So oftentimes when we're trying to decide between two essays that are really similar in their capacities, we ask which student took the biggest swing, which student had the best turn on this prompt, the best interpretation, which student had the most interesting thing to say and still did it effectively. And oftentimes this means that the metaphor that is extended and often bookends essays might not do that job for you. We're looking for the meat that is going to distinguish these essays, not these smaller aspects that might be outer circles in that model.
Another aspect of the concentric circle is nuance, meaning that students make better distinctions in their essay writing. This type of essay will win out because it distinguishes which type of student thinks more clearly and effectively.